Hey everyone, Ryno here, and I finally finished reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, and I want to talk about it because it's our book club book. I actually overall really enjoyed this book. I took my time reading this one. I didn't want to. It was a tough thing to say, okay, only read this much today, only read this much today, because I could just be done, but I really wanted to. I wanted to enjoy it. I wanted to savor it. So I read about 2 to 3 chapters a day. And then when I got to the last like 200 pages, I just had to finish it because I couldn't stop. No, I enjoyed it. I think this is probably my second favorite of the Hunger Games books. I'm one of the people that I do really enjoy Mockingjay, I think, the best. I actually went back and looked at the Hunger Games books when I was like, oh, maybe I'll reread these. But I am also trying to tell myself to keep rereading the same books I've read some new adventures. Not that but I was going to do it, but instead I went through and I was like, well, I haven't seen my movies in a while. So I went through and watched them all, and just to kind of give myself a little bit of a refresh. And the first thing I noticed when I not when I watched the movies, but when I opened one of the books just to look at it really quick to read like the first couple pages. I didn't even notice this when I started reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but there's a switch in the narrative style, in the writing style. It goes from, and excuse me, I've got some notes here, so I might be looking down a little bit. But in The Hunger Games, it's in the first person present, and in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, it's third person limited, because he never says I. It's always Coriolanus or Coriolanus. I don't know how you say it. I looked up the video. It's one of those type of names where I wrote Coriolanus, but I kept saying Coriolanus because I'm like, the guy's a butt, right? But everybody in this book had really weird names. There was like one of the mentor other students in the school. I forget what I was even calling her. Like, I don't remember right now because shouldn't really end up being very relevant. I guess everybody was kind of relevant, but I didn't want to get into like the nitty gritty, and I didn't take a ton of notes while I was reading this because it was just I wanted to enjoy it. But I do have some. I thought overall, I'll just give you my overall opinions first, and then we'll dive into some of the stuff I've written here. I thought it was really good because, like I had said in the other video I made when I said this was going to be our next book club book, I was concerned that this was written just like purely out of financial reasons, like, oh well, I might as well write another Hunger Games books because, you know, I'm sure Lionsgate was like, hey Suzanne, you want to write another one of these and we'll make a movie, and that's where I didn't feel like that while I read it. I thought that this book was definitely worth being written. Like I said, I think this is probably actually my second favorite. I thought it was familiar but different enough. Like, it's so different in terms of how the Hunger Games are done and all this sort of stuff. And what's really interesting too is there's like some names that pop up here and there that you're like, I know this name. You know, like there's a Heavensby in it, and you know, Plutarch Heavensby was one of the gamekeepers in Mockingjay, or actually Catching Fire for it, and yeah, I think that was named Plutarch. But so it was one of those where you're like, oh, they must be related somehow. But you have to keep telling yourself, like, this book takes place 64 years before the first book because it's the 10th Hunger Games in here. And it's interesting because Coriolanus is 18 years old in here, or right around there. And so he talks about, you know, the war, you know, 10 years before this when he was young, a little kid during the war, and he had Tigris. And also, so he's got this cousin Tigris that lives with them. I didn't realize this until after, and I was going through and just like kind of trying to look up what other people had said about Easter eggs and stuff, that Tigris is the character that helps Katniss and the group of rebels when they're inside of the Capitol, when they're almost at the mansion. They've gotten like out of the sewer, and I was like, wait a minute. So when I watched the movie, obviously they showed Tigris and she's got a little part in there, but it's interesting because she hates Snow in it, or Snow like had decided she was no longer attractive enough to be involved in the games or something. It was interesting because in this book, Tigris is definitely on the tribute's side. So, but they don't really ever allude to him and her ever having like any sort of falling out. She's the closest person he has in his life. Him and the Grandmam. I like how they call him the Grandmam. But so you've got Coriolanus, you've got Lucy Gray Baird, or Baird, who's the District 12 tribute, but she's not really District 12. She's part of the Covey, which are like a traveling group. So it's interesting too, because this kind of talks about how like people were able to go in between their different places more readily, and so she was a traveler that just kind of got assigned where she was when everything went down. And I thought this book did a really good job of really, like, when you are reading and everything that goes down, you're like, wow, this is really why Snow hates Katniss so much more. It's so much deeper than her just being a rebel. It's kind of why he got a fixation on her to begin with, because she seems to be like the sort of incarnate representation of all things that Lucy Gray was to him, but like not the same character either. So that's what's really interesting. But let me see here. Yeah, I was gonna say I really enjoyed, the reason why I like Mockingjay and like I like this one a lot is I enjoy books and films that do these explorations of sort of these like ethical situations that people get caught up in, and it's kind of like what's the deciding factors that make people make the decisions that they ultimately make, and I think it's interesting that we know some of this, like going into this one specifically, it's interesting because we kind of know some of the decisions that keep on to call him Snake, that Snow will eventually make. So there's some stuff he does in here where you're like, what, we know you as this like kind of sort of a monster character from the Hunger Games, and this is kind of like the mentality behind that, but it's not, it is an exploration almost of nurture versus nature, and kind of what happens when they're at odds with each other, and and it's fascinating. So if you haven't actually read this, I do recommend reading it. And you don't have to have read any of the other Hunger Games books to really read this. I think in the future you could start here and then go forward, and it'll be interesting because when you switch to Katniss's point of view, you'll be like, oh, Snow, that's the guy from this book. I don't think this one led itself to have another one, though. I felt like when it ended, it was kind of the end. I could be wrong, but I feel like he's kind of cemented in being the bad guy that he is. I should have said at the beginning of this that there were going to be spoilers, but I feel like it's obvious when it's book club because you've read the book, so we're here to talk about the book, right? So let me see what else I wrote here. I wrote like, what makes Snow this way? Was it nature or nurture? And in this case, it kind of appears to be both. It is both his kind of upbringing in the capital, and it's what's interesting too in this book is that you see the capital citizens are a lot more. It's this government propaganda that the rebels in the districts are the one who caused all the pain and the harm. And you do see the capital as not being this capital from like the Hunger Games, this extravagant, people are scavenging for food the way that like Katniss had to in the first Hunger Games. And so they're kind of really on this kind of level, like not completely level, like they have more, and they have like, it's like they have the hollows of luxury left behind from the war still. So like the things aren't even built up yet. Like the Hunger Games arena that they play in is still like damaged and everything. And he still is very much a child of war. He's the product of war. He lost his father to the war, and and he hates it. So it's like a flipped perspective of an underdog. He hates it for different reasons that other people hate it, and it makes for an interesting point of view. But I'll get into that because I know there's a note about that specifically later where he talks about it in the book. I wrote, I already said I thought it was an interesting choice to have the writing point of view shift for this one, and actually I thought it served this one best to have it that third person limited perspective. that's, I think, was the ultimate decider for me not rereading the original three. Is like I got to it and I was like, oh, I can't make that switch right now when I'm in the same universe when it goes from third person to that. And like I was like, oh, so I'll watch the movie. I was also looking for an excuse to rewatch the movies, honestly, and I knew I had to make this video for everybody too. So, or I wanted to make this video. I don't have to do anything. I enjoy doing this, and I hope you enjoy watching and having this conversation with me. But so yeah, so let me just, I don't need to go into the nitty gritty details, but I'll say some of the things that I liked and some of the stuff that stood out to me. I really enjoyed the character of Lucy Greybeard. I actually thought the romance stuff in this book was much more fluid and at least better presented from my memory than it was in the Hunger Games. But my big complaint about the movies, the Hunger Games portrayal is like, I mean, they unfortunately are kind of a product of the Twilight time, because the whole thing was supposed to be like Katniss is Bella, and then you've got, you know, Gale and Peeta, who are Edward and Jacob, and it was supposed to be this whole the triangle, the love triangle was a big thing when these movies started getting produced. And that kind of bugs me about the later movies, because though that is present in the book a little bit, it's kind of not really a thing anymore after the first one. At least I didn't feel like it. Like there's a moment here and there, but it wasn't like, who will she choose? And when I was rewatching the movies, I was like, oh God, I just hate Gale. I always hated Gale, but like they just made it this back and forth a little more. And I feel like now that it's been a couple years since they've come out, it doesn't age well, and it kind of, for me personally, brings the movie down in terms of the structure of where it could be. Like it could have, the movies could have been like even more if they had embraced more of that rebel and political stuff, like kind of what the stuff it goes into in the Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, and especially the second part. I feel like it's kind of a weak part for me in all of these. But and then when you read it too, it's just one of those, like if you've read the books, you know, Katniss is very much like, no, I don't have any space in my body, in my soul for any of this sort of stuff to think about. And then the movies happen and you're like, ugh, it feels all kind of dirty. Ugh, I don't like it. Also, in case you haven't noticed, my District 12 shirt. So a big thing that I really enjoyed it, and I have not stopped listening to it afterwards, is the Hanging Tree. You get the origin of that song in here, and it's good. Like, that song was already haunting, but I feel like now that we kind of know what the lyrics specifically are referring to, it made it like extra haunting. Like when I was reading that scene, there was the hanging, and then all of the Mockingjays or the Jabberjays, I think it was the Jabberjays, were like echoing the voices, and I was like, this is so creepy, and I can't wait to see this on film. But I love that it's kind of about snow, and I don't know, it's so good. And so obviously I had to listen to that remix of it from the third movie. If you haven't heard it, I'll throw a link in the video so you can take a listen on like Spotify or something. And then I found a really cool like eerie cover of it that I've kind of been listening to on repeat obsessively. But I was a big fan of that. And one thing I didn't notice while I was reading is that Katniss sings. Well, I didn't know that Katniss sang this, but there's a Meadow song in this, and Katniss sings it to Rue in the first one when Rue dies, and I like completely missed that while I was reading, because there was a lot of songs in this, a lot of ballads. I am assuming, I don't know how you felt while you were reading it, but I was thinking like, is Taylor Swift going to play Lucy Gray? Or that's all I could kind of think of, because the way she like, I just got like a Taylor Swift image in my head, and that's what I just kept kind of thinking of. And who on earth is going to play a young Donald Sutherland? That is going to be a challenge. But if you have any ideas or anything like that, please comments below, because I'd love to see what kind of sort of suggestions people would have. Maybe oh my gosh, I literally like had his name and it slipped out of my head. The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Logan Lerman, maybe he might be a good, like, I don't know though, we'll see. I thought, so what I thought is interesting is Snow has that kind of family catchphrase in here. It's Snow lands on top. And then there's the scene where him and Lucy and the Covey are all at that lake, and she digs up what she calls, some people call it swamp potatoes, but she calls it Katniss. And I think it's interesting because snow falls on top, and then Katniss grows from beneath. And if they call it swamp potato, like, so I'm assuming they, like, I can't remember, but I'm assuming they ate it. And so, like, it's interesting that not only does it grow from beneath, but it kind of nourishes life, whereas snow falls from top and can be dangerous and suffocating. So I was like, I love that sort of, like, dichotomy. It was, that part I was like, this is really, really good. Also a nice, like, subtle name to be like, oh, that's where Katniss kind of comes from. They could have said it in the original one. I don't know. So I have this. Coriolanus is disgusted by the Mockingjays. Over and over, he views them as nature running amok and needing to be tamed. He soon accepts the Jabberjays, which are controllable with the press of a button. There are particularly suggestive moments when he tries to shoot the Mockingjays and catch them in baited traps, but the birds evade him both times. And it's interesting. Like, he likes the one that's natural. It's in order. And, oh, I thought I had it written down here. I might have missed it. But there is a part where he talks about the Mockingjays are, oh yeah, I literally just read it. It's nature running amok. There's no control. There's no order. He doesn't like that. It like scares him. And it's interesting because you're like, okay, well, that's his brain. He likes rules. He likes structure, and he likes to step. It's also interesting because he's not really in support of the Hunger Games either. He doesn't really like it, but it is like his exposure to being like thrown into the Hunger Games, where he literally has to go in there, and that when he kills that one tribute, that and they do this multiple times. And I keep thinking about how good of a scene there's going to be, because there's one point where there's like a blackout and there's a big fight in District 12, and like how that visual is going to be really interesting, because it's kind of like his experiences are when the chains are removed, when the lights are down, like all people will become basically like animals, is what he thinks, and himself included. He doesn't think anybody is above a natural animalistic instinct, and he thinks that the Hunger Games are a means to an end, essentially. So it's another type of control, and when he like kind of really realizes that, it's interesting, because also he hates the war, but then they make him do a writing essay in this, the crazy Dr. Gall, like about what are the things he liked about war, and what was it, that how is he going to take that and apply it moving forward. So it's really intriguing. There is a moment when Snow does make a reference to District 12 being like covered in soot or something, and that all it would take is one spark to kind of have the whole thing like set afire. And I know that could be a reference to the bombing and the erasure of District 12 at the very end of Catching Fire, but I almost think about that as a real, like, District 12 itself is a representation of the state of affairs. Like, this entire series is literally, the society and the government that is built out of this is literally like that. It's all it took was the girl catching fire, Katniss Everdeen, to really start that spark and just have it all kind of crumble and fall apart. And so it's interesting that he has kind of that disgust for this, but that's really the system that he eventually embraces, I felt like the ending of the book, like my only, not even complaint, is this, he has this switch not pretty abruptly, because it's on this like spiral, and it's basically like, you kind of really, he's realizing who he is while we're realizing who he is, and that's basically somebody that, he always wants an option, and he will always go with the better option, and he kind of gets like immediately turns on the person that like was taking him away from that, or I don't know. It's just it all devolves down, like the scene where they go into the like cabin by the water, and she finds the gun with his print. Not she finds it. I think she knew it was there, but the guns with the print on it, like it all kind of, that turns into like What Lies Beneath, like a horror movie where all of a sudden it just new information is presented and you switch. But I think she knew ahead of time before all that happened. I think she was setting that up to kind of maybe bring him there and kill him. I don't know. Or see what he did, maybe. I don't know. Because I don't know. It's weird because they do love it. I do think they loved each other, but I don't know. I don't know. I think he is ultimately a guy that does whatever it takes to survive, and he wants to ensure that survival no matter what, at the expense of others. And it's kind of like his way is the way, but yeah, there's also as the book toward the end of the book, Snow's thoughts turn to Lucy. He says she could fly around District 12 all she liked, but she and her mockingjays could never harm him again. And I think that's really interesting because that kind of, the second that she's associated with that mockingjay, the second, like, it's really like his past coming back to haunt him. And I think that's kind of the beginning of his, like, both his unraveling, but also the unraveling of, I mean, he didn't entirely create the system that they live in the Hunger Games, the original ones, but he is the person that is holding it together. And when the person holding it together starts unraveling, the system starts unraveling, and that's kind of what it is, and it makes a nice full circle kind of tight little story come together. And I think I like that. I think I liked how this was a different psychological journey versus like the Hunger Games was kind of, it was the effects of war and, the underdog, and when you stand up for what's right and just, and what that can cost you and everything like that. And this is interesting because this one takes place close to the end of a war, which is where this one left off at the end of a war. It's an interesting switch to go from these to this because it almost feels like, okay, well, what was next after war? And that is what happens, and this is like an affirmation about, I don't know if you remember in Mockingjay, and President Coin kind of essentially stepping in and being like, starting to become Snow Part 2, that then I was always like, what? Katniss killed her. Like, and why did Katniss vote for the Hunger Games? And I always wondered that. I think she voted for the Hunger Games so that she could get close enough, that Coin would trust her enough to let her close enough to kill Snow, when then she could actually kill Coin. I think that was her mindset. But I think it's interesting because this was all about to happen again at the end of Mockingjay, and like, so that's kind of, it really adds this extra sense of like revolution to what Katniss does when she kills Coin. Like, it's like, okay, Katniss is really the nail in the coffin, saying like, this is it, we are not doing this cycle again, because it already happened once before this book, and then it happened between this book and the beginning of the Hunger Games, and now it was all happening again. It's like history repeating, and finally Katniss was the one who could rise above it and was like, I put an end to the system and start anew, and it was more than just one person. It was a number of events and people that needed to be in the right places. And so it's interesting how these are all intertwined like that, because this is the, like, after the original war, and then this one is after the, this one is a war. And so I kind of like how they all go together, and they're also, so, you have this like journey through the war, and then you have this like journey after the war and what eventually leads to the war, and it's just kind of this like this Mobius strip of things, and it adds an extra layer of relevance and importance to Mockingjay when Katniss finally is able to break that strip, that Mobius strip, supposedly, hopefully. I mean, I'm assuming she did. So I recommend it. I feel like I'm just kind of rambling at this point a little bit. So I have one part from this book that I do want to read really quick, if you don't mind. And let me see here. So page 495, I enjoyed this. This is when he is running away with Lucy Barrett into the woods, and they haven't found the house yet, but they're close to it, and it's it's yeah, I'll just so they hiked on toward the lake, each lost in their own thoughts. It all seemed unreal to him, as if this was just a pleasure outing, as the one 2 Sundays ago had been, as if they were going for a picnic, and he must be sure to get back in time for fried bologna and curfew. But no. When they reached the lake, they'd moved on into the wilderness. When they reached the lake, they'd move on into the wilderness to a life consumed with the most basic type of survival. How would they eat? How would they live? My gosh, I gotta actually read what's written. How would they eat? Where would they live? And what on earth would they do with themselves when the challenges of attaining food and shelter had been met? Her with no music, him with no school or military or anything, have a family? It seemed too bleak an existence to condemn a child to. Any child, let alone one of his own. What was there to aspire to once wealth, fame, and power had been eliminated? Was the goal of survival further survival and nothing more? I think there's a lot said there that his existence is defined by ascension, by aspiration, to that his existence is defined by a social ladder to climb, and that's an interesting commentary just on life itself right now and anywhere. I mean, isn't that America? Isn't that the dream is starting at the bottom and making it to the top? But when in reality you look at a system in place that is extremely rare, and we actually have systems in place to stop people from being able to do that, especially all people, and that's not fair, and it's interesting, was the goal of survival further survival and nothing more? And that kind of is what becomes of people's lives who are in the districts, that you're just trying to survive, you're just trying, you don't even have the time to dream of a climb, of power, of wealth, I mean, you can try, but it's just survival. And there's something that rang really true to me in there, and the fact that he's like disgusted about that too, and he's like, well, I don't want to be like this. I want to use the privilege that has been afforded to me, and I'm going to keep the system in place to make sure that I make it to the top and no one else gets up here as well. So there is some interesting echoes, in here, but it's not, that's something for you to dive a little deeper into, I think. But it feels like a good time to read this book, and I felt that about the Hunger Games too. Like I said, I think everybody enjoys a story like Harry Potter or Hunger Games, or just like kind of somebody who can overcome evil, and this is a little more, I mean, these weren't just like, oh, she's good, he's evil. It doesn't work like that. It's like, what makes those things what they are, and what is the system that we put in place, and what is the design of it. And it's interesting because when he is expelled from school, essentially for treating the Hunger Games, he's basically like, well, his whole life now is literally all he has is the military, is the peacekeepers. And the second he had that glimpse of out, he was like, I'll do whatever it takes to stay, to go back. And he couldn't handle living like the other side, and it's intriguing. It is an intriguing book, but it's definitely one to meditate on. I really am curious about your thoughts. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? What did you think? Who do you think is going to play these characters? I, for one, am very intrigued. There are a ton of references and parallels in this book to the Hunger Games as well. Some that will be very clear. Nothing that I felt like was over the top. Nothing that was just like, oh, you read it and you'd be like, oh, see what you did there. It was all natural. It felt like very believable. This was the world that led to the capital that we see in this, this area. And it's kind of interesting too, because I do like the side that you get a little more into like the peacekeepers and what their duty is, and how they're just kind of they're just people too. They're not all capital. They're just trying to survive. It's a story of survival and told from many different societal places and misfortunes, and and interesting. So that's why I think I like this one a lot more, or a lot. Not that I didn't. There's none of these that I didn't like. None of the books that I didn't like. I enjoyed all the books. I do enjoy all the movies. Some I like more than others. But they are a journey, and I think this one was just like, it was good. It was good. It's definitely. There's a ton of Easter eggs, ton of links in there. If you want to look them up, there's some sites that have interesting parallels and stuff like that. And there's some stuff where I was like, oh, I didn't even know that, like the Tigress thing. I didn't even know until after I finished reading it that she even comes back or anything like that. So, and that's almost like where we don't know her full story, that I want to know what is going on with that. And I completely lost my train of thought because where I record in my house, I don't have a door, I don't have a room. I'm just up in a loft overlooking the rest of my house. So it's hard to find a few minutes to do videos like these where I'm not like, something's not going on, Love my 2 dogs, but because of everything that's going on, mail trucks here, the second they hear it, they go crazy and everything like that. And so it's been a struggle, but, I'm happy for these moments. I'm happy to be able to do these videos and everything like that. And I'm happy that we've all been able to. I hope you enjoy them. I have enjoyed reading along and everything like that. I have no clue what the next book will be, but before I go, though, I did want to say there is a film in development. I think I already said this. It is going to be directed by Francis Lawrence, who made he made Catching Fire and Forward, all of those movies. Gary Ross directed the first one, and so Francis Lawrence will be back for The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Before I got to, I just want to say, this book actually felt like 2 books, so I do not see a world where this is 1 movie. I don't know about you, but basically parts 1 and 2 felt like 1 movie, and then the third part felt like a whole separate movie. So I am curious if that's how they'll divide it, because, basically once he joins the Peacekeepers, it feels like a whole nother story, and it's like kind of, his perspective in life has completely been like shattered and changed. But the other part is about like the Hunger Games and how the students are the mentors and all this stuff. So it was great because for me, I love a book that takes place over a long period of time. And so I enjoyed that. I don't think I'd be upset if this were 2 movies. I think I'd be upset if this were 3 movies. But I'd be interesting to see. I almost feel like 1 movie isn't going to do the story justice, but I don't know. I guess some of the earlier stuff you could go through a little faster, because really I feel like the meat of the story, which is about what, like, the beginnings are like, here are the Hunger Games, here are the events that cause like a series of reactions, and then the third chapter is consequences, and it's all about how those consequences will always kind of be haunting you, and then you start to make decisions again, based on those consequences that then have more consequences, that it's just this kind of like downward slope. It starts a snowball that you can't stop. But yeah, so I'll be interested to see where they go. Hopefully we get that movie sooner than later. I'm sure it's a priority for Lionsgate. They made a ton of money on the Hunger Games. But just thank you everyone out there for watching this video. Thank you everyone for reading. I probably didn't cover a lot of stuff that I meant to, but my notes were kind of all over the place, and I just really wanted to get this out there and hear from anybody who watches this what you thought. So please leave me some comments below. I'd love to have a little conversation with everyone out there, and I will... I guess I'll be back with another book club soon, eventually. I'll find another book, and hopefully you'll be reading along. But suggestions are always welcome as well. So until next time, I hope you are all staying safe, happy, and healthy, and I'll see you soon. Bye.